Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jeremy Weiss, and for those who I have not yet had the pleasure to meet, I am, as I mentioned, Jeremy Weiss, and I'm a director at the Yad Vashem International Relations Division. Today's lecture, Nakam. Nakam in Hebrew is revenge. My father, who was born and raised in Austria, managed to escape the Nazis in the late 1939 to the US. Towards the end of the war, he joined the US Army as a field intelligence officer. In one occasion, he was asked to interrogate an SS officer. The two US infantry soldiers that were guarding the room, the small room, that the prisoner was in, stopped my father at the entrance and said to him, "Do what you need to do. We won't say anything. Just do what you need to do." They gave him a pistol, a loaded pistol, and my father entered the room. When he left the room, the two infantry soldiers looked in and nothing was done to the SS officer. My father did not revenge his family's faith. In the Old Testament, revenge is mentioned many times. Yet, are we really a people of revenge? I'd like to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Professor Dina Porat. Dina is a Tel Aviv University professor of Jewish history. She also heads the Cantor Center for Studies of Contemporary European Jewry and is a chief historian of Yad Vashem. Professor Porat has written and edited a large number of books and articles on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. Today, Dina will discuss with us her most recent book, Vengeance and Recompense Are Mine. My colleague Jane Jacobs from Yad Vashem International School for Holocaust Studies will be interviewing Professor Porat. Once again, to everyone today, now to already 260 participants, thank you very much for joining us and for this lecture. Dina, Jane.
Good evening, everyone. Wow, from so many places around the world. And just get this out of the way. Hello, my parents, who already said hello. It is my honor to be here this evening to interview my wonderful longtime colleague, Professor Dina Porat. We've been working together for over a decade on various international relations ventures. And Dina, as Jeremy already mentioned, has a very impressive CV. I won't go over it again. But for the purposes of this evening, it's important to mention that she's probably the foremost historical authority on Abba Kovner's Avengers, which is a very complex, layered and emotional subject. So Dina, if we can begin, of the 222 people who are currently with us now, it's fair to assume that many people here already know a lot about the Avengers, because this is a quite widely known subject now, but there may also be people here who are learning about them for the very first time. So I thought maybe could we start talking a little about Abba Kovner himself, whose biography you wrote. Maybe you could tell us a little about him as a key figure both in Holocaust history and in the fledgling state of Israel.
Yes, thank you, the organizers. Thank you for having invited me. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you all the people who gathered. You cannot say that this Zoom does not have advantages. Here we are speaking with all the world at once. So thank you, Jane. We won't waste any more minute for the first question. I'm not sure many people know a lot about the story. Many people have heard about it, but I think that I would be right in saying that they have heard in general that there was such an idea of major vengeance headed by Abba Kovner, but the details, I believe, are being very detailed for the first time in this research that took me quite a number of years. To Abba Kovner, I had the honor of writing his biography. It was published by Stanford and got the National Jewish Book Prize or whatever. He was really an outstanding personality. And I would say shortly, because we do have to still go into the story and its implications, etc. I would say shortly that having grown up in Vilna, which was a hub of Jewish culture, Jewish cultural treasures, Jewish life, theater, institute, etc. He grew up in the midst of many Jewish sources, which he was imbued with. He was a head and leader of a branch of the Hashomer HaTzair, a leftist Zionist youth movement of 1,000 members, and he was the leader and the head. And then during the Soviet occupation, he formed an underground that later was a basis for an underground during the German time. When the Germans came, he hid in a monastery from where he watched what was going on in the ghetto, and with a number of friends who were contemplating the same idea, reached the conclusion that here is a wholesale planned effort to murder the Jews of Europe. And he was the first one not to think so, but the first one to write it down, to pen it down. And therefore, if this is our fate, let's resist. Let's choose our own minute and way of dying. That was the first call for resistance. It didn't work out. He was one of the former founders of an underground in the ghetto. The real revolt or battle didn't work out. The crowd, the audience the people of the ghetto did not join him. They left for the forests, where he was the commander of 4 Jewish units, an unheard of phenomenon in the Soviet Partizanka. Afterwards, after the war, he started the first line of the bricha, of coming out of Europe at the end of 44 towards Lublin, Bucharest, and then Italy. On the way, he formed a conglomerate of survivors of all opinions and former parties. Never mind, they were together despite former political ideologies. And then he tried to exercise revenge on the Germans, a story that we will tell in a minute. And then after a number of major events, he is in the land of Israel. He fights in the War of Independence in the Givati Brigade, where he serves as an information officer that wrote battle pages, to encourage the soldiers in most difficult times when everything seemed to collapse. And after the war, he became in Israel a known poet, author, a man who got every prize under the sun for his works, and it became major cornerstones in Israeli culture, became the rabbi of his kibbutz, of his leftist kibbutz. And he was, I would say, a creator of culture. For instance, the Diaspora Museum the concept is his intellectual work. So
I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was
yes,
that he was
the
behind
concept
the
of the first, and it's really elaborate and encompasses all of Jewish history.
Yeah.
It's really a masterpiece. So this is a personality. He was a great orator, and a person of thinking, of exquisite Yiddish and extraordinary Hebrew and other languages, an intellectual of the first class. And for our story, he was the leader and the founder of the group of Avengers.
Oh, thank you. That was very, very comprehensive. I just want to make this clear for our listeners that he was the leader of the group of the Avengers, as you mentioned, but just before you start to talk about the Avengers, this is essentially the most significant and organized such revenge collective known to historians of the Holocaust. And we also know that for many years, they had a pact. They weren't allowed to discuss it. So the fact that you, Dina, have interviewed, we're so close with Abba Kovner's family and had these first-hand sources and also managed to interview so many of them is also why your work is so very meaningful. So just to mention again, Dina's book was awarded the Bahat Prize of Haifa University for the best literary research. And it will be published next year in English under the title of Vengeance and Recompense Are Mine by Stanford Press. But could you please tell us a little bit about just what sort of new information could you bring to light with this book in terms of how much people already knew about the Avengers plot and what you managed to unearth?
Okay. I think I'll take, Jane, this opportunity with your permission to outline the story just in a few sentences.
Yes,
and then
please.
the question of what is new about the sources and the work will be more highlighted.
Thank you.
So after the war, following the war in Lublin, a group starts gathering around Abba Kovner. They numbered 50 young men and women, and they decided to kill 6 million Germans. 6 for 6. If you ask me today, how did they know it's just the end of 44, the beginning of 45? The war isn't even over. How did they already speak about the number 6 millions? I cannot tell you. Believe me, I looked high and low and couldn't understand how at such an early stage they said 6 million, and they were almost right. After years of work in Yad Vashem, we came upon 5,875,000 and a bit more Jews. So they were close. They decided to kill 6 million Germans by poisoning the water sources of some 4 German cities. For this, of course, they would have to go into Germany, have poison ready-made, and indeed, they organized themselves, but they went from Lublin to Bucharest and then to Italy, met the Jewish brigade, the soldiers from the land of Israel who were fighting under British army, and there he sort of handed over the hundreds and thousands of refugees, Jewish refugees who started gathering into the warm, caring hands of the Jewish brigade, and he and the 50 devoted themselves to revenge. There, I must say here that their idea was that it just cannot be, that after such a crime that was perpetrated, there are no signs that anyone is going to judge the German people, to put them on trial, that this crime is going not only unpunished, unmentioned. In October 45, the Nuremberg trials began, but they did not take the Jewish Holocaust as an issue. So no judgment, no punishment, only for the high echelons. The Allies were setting the thousands and tens of thousands of SS prisoners free because they couldn't take care of them for long. And okay, what kind of a world is that? How can they go back to normal life and start a family, go to the land of Israel, start a new kibbutz, Papa, when the account is not finished? It is still cried, the blood is still, as they said, crying out from the earth, as the Bible says. So they decided to poison these 6 million. They go to Germany, spread into small groups. Abba Kovner goes, sails on a ship with, of course, false documents. He wasn't a British soldier, on a British ship. Here, he understands quite quickly that the idea of 6 million Germans killed is not something that will get any support. And I hope Jane will ask me later about this point, because it's very important. He found total objection to the idea, so he told it to very few people. But he said that he came, to gather and get general support for the idea of revenge, and to poison the SS prisoners that were still in the camps. He got the poison, and none less, who gave it to him? None less than later the fourth president of Israel, Professor Ephraim Katzir, who was then a student in Jerusalem. They had a laboratory of chemistry, etc. He gets the poison, he goes back, but he again has a false document, which wasn't too good. The British were very nervous after the murder of Lord Moyne. They checked a lot, and they saw that they have a few, as if soldiers who are not registered at all, put him to jail. In the meantime, he's in jail. The groups in Germany are waiting for the poison. They are already working in the water system of cities, waiting for the poison to come and be put in, but the poison doesn't come. He took the poison with him, and when he was arrested by the British, he threw it into the water of the Mediterranean, where it must be still lying. So the poison didn't come. They concocted another poison and spread it under bread loaves, thousands of bread loaves that were served to SS prisoners in an American camp. That's more or less the story. After that, they were shipped by the Haganah to the land of Israel. And Jane asked me, okay, if the story was known in its general lines, what is new about what I'm bringing? What is new is that, first of all, I knew them from the days I wrote the biography of Abba Kovner. So I interviewed every one of them. Out of the 50, 35 were really active, the main groups. I interviewed every one of them, not once and not twice. So we became friends, though I told them 10 times that I don't agree with the idea of killing 6 million people. But still we remained friends. Interviews, there is a little archival material, direct archival material, more interviews of others who were around the story, and 3 very interesting new sources. One is that after they spread this poison under the breads, underneath loaves of bread, they did it, some 3,000 loaves, and ran away from the bakery. There was an American investigation. Who put some poison? They were very disappointed. No one died, because the Americans were so overwhelmed by the idea that someone is poisoning their own prisoners that they rushed them to hospitals and treatment, washed the stomachs, and saved them all. But they also opened a very detailed and minute investigation into the matter. Now, the protocols of the investigation were in the National Archives near Washington in Maryland. And they didn't want to give them to a public, the public eye. They were closed. With some letters and with the help of Associated Press that wanted the whole story open, finally, after more than 60 years, hallelujah, the American National Archives gave out the protocol and I got a copy, and it said that they did a remarkable job technically, and not only did they do a remarkable job, the poison that they themselves concocted was good enough to kill some 600,000. That was one source that was really new. The other one was that I remained on good terms with Vitka Kovner, Abba Kovner's life companion, a remarkable, outstanding lady, a lady of no fear. She got the medal of the Soviet Union hero, one of the very few ladies who got it, and she was the first woman who took off a German train off its rails by putting a mine underneath. So she was something else. And when I told her, after the biography was over and some years after, that I'm about to write a book about the Revenge group, she said, great, a good idea. Went to a cupboard in which Kovner's files were very organized. He was a very organized person. Took out one of them and said, take, this is the Revenge file. And it had inside all the correspondence, the principles of the group, the organization of the group, the correspondence with others outside the group. It's a treasure.
That really is a treasure.
Yes.
Yes. Wow. So so to have that and the American protocols, which hadn't been seen before by anyone, yes, enabled you to draw the most salient conclusions historically that have been drawn until now, which is another reason your book is so significant. If it's okay, I'd like to talk about your hypothesis or your belief that you come back to quite a few times in the book, where you discuss Abba Kovner's change of heart when he came to visit pre-state Israel and speak to the leaders of the Yishuv that you've mentioned before, when he came to acquire the poison. And you believe that his change of heart happened when he came on this visit. And I'd like to know what in your research led you to this, and how did his wife Vitka and the surviving members of the Avengers who you interviewed feel about this theory?
Okay, I'm not sure they agree with me, because Kovner used to say after the war and after they gathered in the land of Israel that he did not change his mind, that he thought that this plan A, as it was called, to kill the 6 million, was justified and moral to its time. But he also referred to it as a symbolic act. He said, I didn't really mean it practically, but symbolically. So he said this and he said that. And you are quite right in asking me, in asking this question, because the other members and Vitka, who were vehemently pro the plan, didn't accept it and had very harsh arguments with him. Now, why a change of mind? Why a change of mind in the land of Israel? He came at the summer of 1945. Not an easy time, fractions between the generally organized Yishuv and the paramilitary two undergrounds that did terrorist acts against the British. But it was a time, despite all these inside political fractions and debates, it was a time of building, of putting up new settlements, new kibbutzim, survivors were coming in. It was already the summer of 45. The Ha'apala ships were bringing in multitudes of refugees, of survivors, and they were absorbed in the country. And there was a feeling of building and of looking to the future and not back to the past. One must understand that the Yishuv that numbered some 475,000 on the eve of the war, most of it were not born in the land of Israel, very few. You know that a majority of born in Israel was only in the 1970s. Before that, all the time we were newcomers.
Right.
But most of them came from Europe, and most of those who came from Europe came from Poland, and all of them lost their families. They all lost their families. And therefore, it wasn't that they did not have an ear for what Kovner was saying or other survivors who came. On the contrary, they felt guilty for leaving their families there and coming here, and they lost the families. So they also wanted revenge. They also cursed the Germans and Austrians and the others upside down. But there was a feeling of not looking backwards, but looking forwards, of building, and of integrating, once there is a state, in the family of nations. And if you go around killing millions of people, it won't help you build a state, and it won't help you be accepted to the family of nations. And so he understood it. He was a person of, as we said, exceptional intelligence. He understood it. He stopped talking about it after he met just a few of the leadership and talked about revenge against SS or revenge in general. So there it was where he understood that this plan is not going to get any support. And I think he went back with the poison, hoping that the poison would be used against the SS. But when he was arrested, he threw it out of the window. That's more or less it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you now a little about attitudes to revenge in general, which actually is being reflected at the moment in the comments. I see that Shaya Ben Yehuda has written a very moving testimony about his father, if you want to have a look in the chat. But in general, Yad Vashem's whole approach to remembering and educating about the Holocaust, as many of you know, is built around examining, first of all, Jewish life before the war, and then a faithful retelling of Holocaust history, and then focusing upon the return to life and how survivors rebuilt themselves following the Shoah. And anyone who's visited our museum or attended any of our educational programs will understand this, and this will be familiar. In your book, you say that the Avengers themselves believed that vengeance was a fundamental necessary stage for their transition to the return to life stage. Mm-hmm. But I think we can also acknowledge that very few other survivors, and I'm honored to see we also have some in our audience this evening, sought to attach themselves to a group like the Nakam, like the Avengers. And you mentioned as well that the Yishuv was flatly opposed to the planned mass poisoning of municipal water supplies, and even the plot to poison the SS bread. So, and many survivors also have said a lot like Shaya's father mentions in the chat that he's put, that the greatest revenge that they could possibly achieve against the Nazis is actually survival and rebuilding and family and being in the Jewish state. So how would you explain this very wide spectrum of feeling the need to revenge?
Okay. I would say the following. This group set for itself a purpose, as we said, to punish and to bring about some justice. But it was also a warning. What they thought is the Jewish history, and we said before that Kovner was imbued in Jewish sources, history, textbooks, rabbinical literature, that and they all themselves were members of youth movements. They were educated in the best Jewish schools before the war. They were educated and thinking young people. And they thought that Jewish history is a long line of troubles, pogroms, exiles, persecutions, etc. And enough is enough. And they wanted their revenge, the big revenge, to be a sort of a puenta that you put at the end of the sentence and say, no more. That's it. Anyone who would again contemplate some such thoughts against the Jewish people would know that vengeance on a large scale is awaiting him. We also should remember that anti-Semitism didn't stop with the end of the war. It went on in a murderous way, in a most cruel way, because Jews who tried to come back home to see if there is a home, if someone survived, were killed. And there were at least 2,000 killed after the war. Lithuania, Slovakia, Austria, and Poland, mainly in Poland. The Avengers wanted to end this line and to have it as a warning. But I think for a good answer to your question, we should put this 50 in a large context. You wanted to know how come most of the survivors did not take this road, did not choose this road of vengeance. How come and what is the context? Right after the war, everyone was sick with feelings of vengeance against the Germans. And I'm not speaking only about Jews. All nations that suffered under the Nazi yoke and prisoners out of concentration camps and hard laborers were all craving for vengeance. The Soviets, the Red Army, entered Germany towards the end of the war from the east, and they not only took revenge, they took wild revenge, and they were encouraged to do so. The famous General Zhukov, the master of Germany's defeat, put signs in Russian at the entrance of roads into Germany that said, "Soldier, you are on German soil, take revenge." And they took, they burnt and they raped and until it went out of hand and they were stopped, but not fully. Other nations as well, the Czechs, the Poles, whoever suffered wanted to take revenge. So it's not our group, it's the whole atmosphere in Europe. Now, all other Jews as well entertained thoughts and dreams about how they would revenge the people who killed their families. But most of the rest of the survivors, who were some 250,000 in Germany in camps, some 45,000 in Austria, 20 in Italy, some 250,000 to 300,000, they did not vote for his revenge. They didn't discuss it formally. They had their institutes and their committees. They did not discuss it, but their general atmosphere, much like the one in the land of Israel, was that we'll remember forever what was done to us, but we want a new family. We want to live among Jews. We want to look forward. There were some of them who did go out of their camps and took revenge here and there. But please remember that most of them were in the worst of physical condition. No weapons, no military training. even if they wanted to, physically, it was hard for them, but they didn't want to. May I tell you, Jane and all others, a short story, which is a French officer. You know, Germany was divided, Soviet Union, France, Britain, the Americans. A French soldier with his unit is stationed in a German village and the region. He goes around to see what's the region he's responsible for, and he finds a camp of refugees, Jewish refugees, looks at them and says, Oya broch, how these people look and how destitute they are and their physical condition, takes a few trucks, puts them on the trucks and brings them to the village. To the young Jewish men, he gives pistols and he puts them in front of the German village and says, kill them. And the Jews said, the refugees said, are you out of your mind? Why should we kill them? He said, look at yourselves and look at them. Kill them and take their homes. I am supporting it and I want it. They said, sorry, we never saw these people. They didn't kill our families. We see here women, children, elderly, you know, most of the men in Germany, millions were killed. Sorry, we are not doing such things. Went out on the trucks and went back. So that comes to show you that it was both a feeling that vengeance is in a way stooping down morally. So they didn't want to go this way.
That's a very good illustration of the story. And in fact, there's some comments as well mentioning that the killing of innocents would have been murder and not necessarily justice. And I think as well, that ties in with what you were saying before about how you told the families of the members of the group that you were very glad that it hadn't come to fruition.
Of course.
And that some of them didn't agree with you. And I want to turn, if we can, to the final chapter of your book, where we discuss the emotional state of the group, and after all the years, and how you said that some of them were very satisfied with the results of Plan B and the fact that nobody had died in the end. Some of them were furious that nobody had died, and some of them were still furious that Plan A never materialized, and some of them were just happy that it hadn't happened. Do you think that those who were holding on to all the anger ever managed to move on? The process that you've been describing, like the survivors who met the French officer, and like so many other survivors who don't have a need to revenge.
You mean how did they go on with their lives despite the fact that they didn't succeed?
Yes. Or just in general to let go of being part of this very strong group. And
you see, they as a group, as an embodiment of angry survivors, were looked upon with a lot of suspicion by the organized Yishuv, the Haganah, the Palmach, the Jewish Brigade. They were suspicious in principle to survivors in general, because who knows how people who went out of the Holocaust are, how they are feeling, who they are emotionally, mentally. Can you rely on them? Are they on the track or off the track? There was a lot of suspicion. And so the Haganah in the Yishuv put an inspection on the survivors, but I must tell you this. They put inspection, and the commander of the Haganah in Europe, situated in Paris, when he met the headquarters of the Avengers, after each meeting, he wrote a report and sent it to the land of Israel. And I found it for the first time. It lay there for some 70 years. And I found it, and it said that the Yishuv and the Haganah and the Jewish Brigade and everyone wanted revenge, but thought it is an interference on the efforts to absorb the Sherit HaPleta, the survivors, and on the way to building a state. So they remained sort of suspects. Now, when they come here, at the beginning still it's suspects, but after a very short time, the Mossad and the Shabak, the Internal Security Service, thought that these are people who are ideal for Mossad work because they know how to cross borders illegally, how to use a falsified document. They have seen death 10 times a day. Some of them are communists, but now they are loyal Verbrennte Zionists. So they were taken and enlisted. Most of them fought in the War of Independence. And there they became involved in the Yishuv, in the country, built families, and became respectable citizens. They still were very angry that it didn't work out.
Right.
But now it's not to put to test anymore, showing it's over. You can say from now to eternity that you are disappointed and all the Germans should have died, da, da, da. It is not put to test anymore. So they became trusted and loyal citizens, still hanging around Kovner until the day he died. Very strong friendship among them, very, very strong, warm friendship among them. And they created families, and they also had the sweet revenge of seeing offsprings, second and third generation.
Which is, of course, the best revenge.
Yeah.
Actually, then, having investigated a little as well, reading some of the things that some of them said, one of them, Leopold Wassermann, what was his nickname?
Poldek.
Poldek.
Oh, he passed away at 97 a month ago.
Oh,
yeah.
So he was one of the last ones. He would talk about that he viewed revenge as his basic right, as a basic human right of his, and that he said when he left when he first left the camps that his need to revenge was actually more important to him than his need to live. But then when he was interviewed further down the line, a few years later, he said that while he still feels that way, he also doesn't hold post-war generations responsible in Germany, for example, even if he can't still forgive their ancestors, which made me wonder, do you believe that the need for revenge is still reflected among any of the families or the descendants of the Avengers? Because almost all of them are dead now, right? Only one or two?
Well, three are alive.
3 are alive.
2 ladies of 97 and one 101.
Wow.
Yeah, Edek is 101. Yeah.
But in terms of their families, and I know as well that you spoke a lot to some of their children if they weren't alive, and also in general in second generation groups and in Israeli society today. I mean, you meet so many people, especially in your work combating anti-Semitism. Do you see any types of tie-ins that there's this feeling of revenge is still strong within our social fabric?
Well, thank you for the question and for all the other questions as well. Yes, there is a very, I think, deep, serious point here. The children and grandchildren heard the story once and again. They all couldn't understand at the beginning how their parents, loving, normal people, wish to kill millions and innocents among them. But they heard the story, and they are proud of their parents. They may be proud exactly because it didn't materialize. It didn't come to any fruition. No one died, but there was an attempt. It was a very heroic attempt to bring justice and for the Jewish people and warning for the other peoples. So they are proud of their parents that symbolically are the group that embodies revenge. But there is one more point, and this is an assumption of mine, and I cannot prove it fully, but I think that what happened is the following. During the first decades, until the middle of the 80s, they didn't speak. They vowed not to reveal the story. And in the middle of the 80s, Kovner, who was a heavy smoker, a very heavy smoker all his life, got cancer of the the chords, the vocal cords, and they had to cut them. He was speechless during the last phase of his life. So before, when he got ill, they gathered, they recorded, they spoke, and the story began to be known. They were afraid. No one would understand what they wanted. They would be seen as killers. They would set a horrible example for the Arabs, this and that. But with time, their story began to be heard, began to be respected. And when I studied it and I invited them to events, I saw what respect they were welcomed with. And I asked myself, why? A few decades ago, these were killers and suspects. How such respect today? I have a theory. Israel and Israeli society did not forgive the Germans, that's out of question, but has relations with Germany, warm relations, culture and commerce and education and academia and diplomatic. Since 1965, there is an ambassador. Angela Merkel is today our best friend in the EU, etc., etc. And there is a feeling that it was good for the development of the country, but it was too quick. It was too quick. It was too general. The Germans were not only not punished, they were not even reproached by us fully and denounced. And this group that symbolizes revenge stands, how shall I put it, like a road sign that said, stop, don't go so fast down the road of appeasement and of relations with the Germans. They were not punished. And it goes against justice, against the world and moral justice. So this is, I think, why they are really respected. Also, they are people of a very high level. And meeting them is an experience. Jane, may I say a word about the title?
Yes, a quick
Okay.
word. You've got a
Thank
couple
you.
more minutes before we
Yes.
take. Actually, if I can just take this opportunity to ask anybody who has a question for Professor Porat, if you could write it in the comments. Thank you. Go on, Dina.
The book is called after a phrase in the Psalms where God says, Li nakam v'shilem, vengeance and recompense are mine. Okay? And I chose it because in order to say that what the Bible says is that vengeance is not in human hands. It is in divine hands only, and only if he orders a person to do this or a group to do this and that revenge. So I chose it in order to say they wanted to kill millions. And they had their arguments and their warning and justice, etc. But actual revenge should not be in the hands of human. Yeah.
Right. This is what that's actually reflected in a couple of the comments in the chat, which have mentioned that God is the one that gives the revenge, or that it's a larger concept that we as a people can unite together and be the revenge, children and grandchildren. Okay, we have a question now from Richard Robertson. My question is in regards to the early experiences of the Avengers. How many of them, other than Kovner, were members of Hashomer before the war, or participated in the FPO or ZOB or other groups during the war?
The core group was really from Vilna. I would say that about 15 were from Vilna, mainly Hashomer HaTzair members in this chapter of the movement that he was the leader of. But all the others, you mentioned other undergrounds and organizations, Mr. Robertson. Yes, most of the group were either ghetto fighters, underground members, partisans in the forests, escaped from the death marches after being in the underground in Auschwitz and the other places. Most of them were active, very active during and defiant during the war. And I think certainly it had an effect on the way they acted after the war.
Thank you. We have another question now. In many survivors' memoirs I've read from Toda, mentioned is made of liberating soldiers saying that there was a 3-day rule where survivors would be allowed to do whatever they wanted. In each of the instant, the offer was disregarded. Do you know of any instances where surviving Jews did take advantage of this offer to exact revenge?
Well, there were a few cases, but the lady or the man or the sir who asked the question are right. Most of the survivors did not take advantage of the 3 days. And I can tell you that there were other cases, for instance, in Dachau, an American officer who saw the camp and the bodies thrown around and the torture instruments, etc., took his weapon and killed on the spot 300 Germans. So it was on both sides. It was on both sides, but I would say that on both sides, not on a large scale. Sometimes what Jews did is to take revenge not on Germans, but on Jews who were couples. Well, most of them, the policemen tried the best, but some of them to help, etc. But some of them who were cruel and gave a bad name to all these, to all the others, a few were beaten to death by Jews. And you know with what? With the wooden shoes. They were walking in the camps with these terrible wooden shoes, and they were beaten with this.
Thank you. And also some other people have mentioned various instances and that they consider to be revenge. As we're nearing the end, I'd quite like to answer the question here from, excuse me, oh, it's gone. There's a question asking, saying that they were, here we are, as a non-Jew very concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, what can I do to help Yad Vashem? And if there's something that I can take away from tonight, what would you like that to be? So I might answer the first part, if that's all right with you, Dina.
Sure, absolutely.
In terms of helping Yad Vashem, well, it's great to have you here and have you all here, and that even in these troubled times that so many people are interested in continuing to learn about issues surrounding the Holocaust and to educate themselves more on Holocaust history. And we'll have plenty more of these, and please keep coming and passing on this to as many people as possible, raising awareness. I'm going to put a recording of a podcast that Professor Porat recorded on the topic in the chat. So that's also something you can do after that. Dina,
yeah.
if there's something that everyone can take away from hearing about this very complex topic tonight, what would you like that to be?
Okay. Well, that people would know the story, would know that finally no such large-scale revenge ever took place, that the Zionist leadership was against it, that the wish of the Jewish people was to go on and not to punish and to kill, and that going on and building is our main purpose, our main reason of being here in Israel. You were speaking, sir, about anti-Semitism today, and you're worried about its rise. It rose. You know, perhaps that once a year, my team in Tel Aviv University for the last 27 years, we publish every year, a day before Holocaust Memorial Day, the national one on April, a full report on anti-Semitism in the world. In the last few years, it is really worrying. And I think that really every person who can work in education in schools, in improving legislation, in countering accusations in the media, in appealing to leaders to speak against it, to come out against it, should be welcome and should understand that anti-Semitism and riots and violence may begin with Jews, but they never end with Jews. They spill out to the streets. They spill out to, well, to high-level institutes, and it is up to everyone to understand that it is like a lakmus paper that tests the level of violence and of taking care of the other in societies. And if society is healthy and sees the welfare of all its citizens, including all its minorities, then it should work against anti-Semitism and against other evils, against other racism, gypsyism. They suffer, the gypsies today suffer the most, much more than Jews in Europe, and other minorities. I think understanding anti-Semitism leads you to work against racism, to foster the rights of other minorities. And I think this is what we should all take from your question.
Dina, one last question that I just seen come up now. Has Abba Kovner ever been depicted in a film? And if not, has there been a drama made about the Avengers?
A German film?
Any film at all?
Any film, yes. There are a few films, TV documentaries. Two of them very good ones.
The Channel 4. The Channel 4 documentary from 2 years ago.
Channel 4. I'm not sure Kovner is Kovner there.
Not in there, yeah.
No, not anymore. But there were before. Danny Seaton made a good film, and others. There are, I would say, 3-4 films where he and his friends are still there. And then, as we said, he became ill at an early stage and passed away after this operation. He passed away in 1987. But he left a lot in writing. By the way, he did not allow one word of his prolific writing to be translated into German. Not a word of German.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Professor Porat. I'd like to just end with a personal note and follow up on what Professor Porat said. Where there is financial crisis and social unrest, there is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is the canary in the mine. That's where racism begins. And if there's something to be learned from this story is to constantly learn from the past and see how we can take what we've learned from the Holocaust and from this unique, terrible event into the present and into the future by learning it and discussing it. So thank you all 200 plus participants for joining this lecture and from together learning from Professor Porat and from Jane's questions about this very unique story. All the best and thank you very much.